Hello, my name is Luna. I wasn't always invisible. But somewhere along the way, I started fading from the picture. It didn't happen overnight. It was subtle, like fog creeping in after sunset quiet, almost beautiful in its stillness. Until you realize you can't see what's in front of you anymore. I used to live, in a quiet suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A 2-story house with white siding, blue shutters, and a front porch I used to decorate with pumpkins every October. My husband, Tom, built that porch himself back in '91. He passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. Quiet. Cruel. And fast. The house had felt too big since then. Too quiet. But I stayed. I told myself I stayed for the memories. But really, I think I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. I raised 3 kids in that house. Emily, the oldest, lives in New York now. She works in marketing. Nathan's in Denver, building tech startups and collecting espresso machines. And Sarah, my youngest, recently moved to San Diego with her fiancé. They're busy. Their lives move fast. I get it. But sometimes I wonder, did I raise them to fly so far they forgot how to land back home? Every day felt like déjà vu? I'd wake up, make coffee black, 1 sugar feed the cat, water the garden. I kept the hydrangeas alive longer than I thought possible. I'd sit at the kitchen table and scroll through the news. Maybe call a neighbor. Maybe not. By noon, I was already wondering what to cook for one. On Sundays, I'd bake lemon bars. My grandkids loved them. I'd wrap them in wax paper, add little stickers with their names, and mail them across the country. They never said much about them. I imagined the bars sitting in some mailbox too long, maybe ending up stale and forgotten, like the letters I used to write. Holidays became the hardest. Thanksgiving used to be loud, crowded. There'd be mashed potatoes, cranberry sauté, burnt dinner rolls we'd laugh about. Now it was just a phone call, sometimes FaceTime, sometimes just a voicemail. I'd still roast a turkey, just smaller. I'd still set the table with 4 extra plates, even though they'd stay clean. One evening last fall, Sarah came for a short visit. She brought her fiancé, Trevor. Nice kid. Techie. Polite. Always checking his Apple Watch. After dinner, I offered to show them photos from when Sarah was little in Halloween costumes, dancing in the rain with Tom. They smiled, nodded, but their eyes drifted toward their phones. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then something happened I wasn't ready for. Sarah had gone to shower. She left her iPad on the sofa. It lit up with a notification: flight details to Orlando. 8 days. Disney World. The whole family. The kids. Emily. Nathan. Evan, Trevor. My name wasn't there. No one told me. I stared at that screen longer than I should have. My chest didn't tighten the way I expected. There was no storm of anger. No tears. Just a numbness. Thick and spreading. I set the iPad down, careful not to make a sound, and went out to the backyard to water the garden, though it had just rained that morning. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights cast soft shadows on the sidewalk. A raccoon scurried past around 2 a.m. I remember thinking how even the raccoon had somewhere to go. You see, it wasn't about the trip. Not really. It was the silence, the unspoken decision that I no longer fit, like a photo frame taken down and replaced with something newer. Shinya. I had spent my whole life holding others, showing up, making space. But now, No one was making space for me. And that's when it hit me. What if I stopped asking to be part of someone else's story? What if, for once, I wrote my own? I didn't have the answer that night. But something inside me shifted. Not loudly. Not with fury. But like a door slowly creaking open after being stuck for years. My name is Luna. And this is the beginning of what came next. Would you have done the same? Or would you have stayed by the window, hoping they remembered you tomorrow? The next morning, the sunlight felt different. Not warmer. Not softer, just real. As if for the first time in a long time. I wasn't pretending that everything was fine. I was no longer tiptoeing around my own disappointment, waiting for someone to ask how I really felt. I didn't bring up the Disney trip. I didn't want a forced apology or an awkward explanation. What could they say? We thought you wouldn't be up for it. We didn't think you'd want to come. That would have hurt even more. After Sarah and Trevor left, the house felt like a vacuum. Their suitcases had barely left a dent on the guest bed, but their absence rang loud through the hallway. I wandered into the kitchen and looked around. The lemon bars sat untouched on the counter. I stared at them for a long time before throwing them in the trash. That was the moment it happened. Something broke in me, and strangely, something else stood up in its place. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, opened the closet, and just stood there. My clothes looked like they belonged to someone else. Cardigans in shades of beige. Old holiday sweaters I hadn't worn in years. Slacks I kept just in case someone invited me somewhere. No one did. I pulled out 3 suitcases from the attic. One for donations. One for garbage. And one for me. I was 62 years old and finally packing a bag for myself. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with a calm kind of madness. I listed the house. I contacted an agent. I sold furniture that hadn't been sat on in years. I mailed a letter to each of my kids. Not an emotional plea. Not a guilt trip. Just a simple note: I'm leaving. I'm okay. I'm just ready to live differently now. Love. Mom. I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't know yet, either. But one night, while watching a travel show rerun at 2 a.m., I saw a scene that stopped me. A beach town in North Carolina. The camera panned across a long pier stretching into the Atlantic. The water was quiet. Deep blue. Endless. There was a woman walking barefoot with a cup of coffee in hand. Hair silver and loose. Smiling to no one in particular. That was it. I booked a one-way train ticket to a town called Beaufort. I'd never been there. Didn't know a soul. But something about the name, about the ocean and the pier and the woman who smiled like she had nothing to prove called to me. I arrived with 2 suitcases and a heart still bruised. The first night I stayed in a small inn run by a retired couple named Maggie and Joe. Maggie wore tie-dye and called everyone darlin'. Joe made blueberry pancakes every morning and said grace before eating. They didn't ask me why I was there. They just asked what I wanted for breakfast. It felt like the kindest question anyone had asked me in years. Within a week, I found a small cottage for rent on the edge of town. 1 bedroom. White shutters. A porch swing that creaked when you rocked just right. The beach was 3 blocks away. I bought a bike and named her Rosie. I hadn't ridden a bike in 30 years. My body ached in places I forgot existed. But my soul, she was waking up. I started walking every morning, barefoot. Just like that woman in the travel show, I picked up sea glass and shells. Sometimes wrote little notes to myself and buried them in the sand like treasures. I didn't know what I was healing from exactly, but I could feel it happening. Slowly. Like moss, reclaiming an old stone. I bought new clothes. Nothing fancy, just things that made me feel like me. I wore turquoise earrings and wide-brimmed hats. I painted my toenails coral. I said yes when Maggie invited me to line dancing at the community center. I laughed until my cheeks hurt. One afternoon, while reading on the pier, a little girl sat beside me. She didn't say much, just stared at the ocean like it held a secret. I offered her a lemon bar from my bag. She bit into it and smiled. "These are the best in the world," she said, with crumbs on her chin. I blinked how. Not because of the compliment, but because, for the first time, I realized I didn't need my family to tell me I mattered. I didn't need a Disneyland invitation to feel included. I didn't need to be in someone else's plan to belong in the world. I had written myself back into the story. And I was just getting started. Would you believe me if I told you that starting over doesn't always look like running away, but sometimes like finally running toward yourself because that's what I did? And it was terrifying. And beautiful. And absolutely necessary. I didn't know healing could be so quiet. There were no fireworks. No epiphanies under the stars. No strangers with magical advice. Just the steady rhythm of waves brushing against the shore every morning. And the gentle sound of my own breath. Finally learning to slow down. In Beaufort, no one knew my name for weeks, and I loved that. For the first time in decades, I wasn't someone's mom. Someone's neighbor. Someone's widow. I was just Luna. And being just Luna was enough. I started volunteering at the local thrift shop every Tuesday. It wasn't much. But folding donated clothes and chatting with the regulars gave me purpose. There was a man named Curtis, a retired math teacher, who wore suspenders and told stories that may or may not have been true. And Lila, a young mom escaping a life she never talked about. We shared silence the way some people share coffee frequently. And with quiet understanding. Once, while pricing an old set of teacups, Curtis looked at me and said, "You've got ocean eyes, Luna. Like you've seen storms and survived them." I smiled but didn't answer. What could I say that I had spent half my life waiting for people to remember me? Only to realize I'd forgotten myself in the process. Some days were still hard. I'd see a family walking together on the boardwalk, grandparents, kids, grandkids, and feel something twist inside me. Not envy, just a quiet ache, a reminder of a life I once chased like a prize. But I didn't run from those feelings anymore. I let them sit with me, like old guests, temporary, but familiar. And slowly, something in me began to bloom. It started with a notebook. A plain, spiral-bound thing I picked up at the corner shop. I began writing every morning, nothing poetic. Nothing profound. Just thoughts. Feelings. Fragments of days. Memories that stung less when seen through ink instead of tears. I wrote about the way Sarah used to braid her doll's hair beside me on the porch. About the time Trevor built me a birdhouse for Mother's Day and nailed it too low, so raccoons kept knocking it down. I didn't write these to cling to the past, but to free it. One night, I wrote something I didn't expect. I forgive them. Not because they asked, but because I deserve to feel light again. I stared at those words for a long time. That night, I slept without waking. Weeks passed. Summer warmed into early fall. Tourists trickled out. And the town grew quieter. Softer. I loved it more with each changing leaf. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch swing, I saw a letter in the mailbox. Handwritten. From Sarah. I held it like it might burn. The envelope was light, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken moments. I opened it slowly. She wrote, "Mom, I don't know where to start. I keep thinking about that last visit. About the lemon bars. About how we didn't invite you. I told myself it was because the kids would be loud and the walking would be too much. But deep down, I think I just assumed you'd always be there, waiting. Like always. I didn't think about how that must feel. I'm sorry. We miss you. The kids ask about you all the time. Trevor wants to write too. But I wanted to go first. We don't know where you are. But if this finds you, please know you are loved. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I had already done the weeping. This was different. This was grace. I didn't rush to respond. I let the letter sit on my nightstand for days, reading it every morning like a prayer. When I finally wrote back, it wasn't long. Dear Sarah, thank you. I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm learning who I am outside of being needed. And I hope one day, when the time is right, we can start something new. Not out of guilt, but out of choice. With love, Luna. That was enough. A few weeks later, a package arrived. Inside was a framed photo of Sarah and the kids, and a drawing from my grandson, a stick figure labeled Grandma Luna by the beach. It was crooked and perfect. I hung it on the fridge. Not because I needed a reminder of them, but because I wanted them to see, if they ever came, that they still had a place. One Saturday afternoon, I brought a tray of lemon bars to the community picnic at the marina. Curtis took one bite and raised his eyebrows. You ever think about opening a bakery? I laughed. But that night, I wrote it down in my notebook. Because why not? Why not dream again at 62? Why not begin again, not from scratch, but from experience? My story didn't end when I was left behind. It began the moment I chose not to stay there. There's something powerful about starting over when no one expects you to. You get to write the story for yourself. And for the first time, it sounds like your own voice. It started with a question from a stranger. I was restocking mugs at the thrift shop when a young woman with messy curls and tired eyes approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. Excuse me, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you know if the shelter across town takes walk-ins at night? I turned and looked at her more closely. Her sweatshirt was too thin for the chill in the air, and her shoes had holes in both toes. She was shivering, but it wasn't just from the cold. It was the kind of tremble that comes from being lost in every way possible. I'm not sure, I said gently, but I can make a call. She smiled, like I had just handed her a map out of a maze. Her name was Jess. She had left her boyfriend's place the night before. After he punched a hole in the wall, 2 inches from her face, she wasn't waiting around for him to miss next time. While I called the shelter, I offered her a seat, a cup of warm tea, and one of the lemon bars I now baked every Sunday for the thrift shop staff. She bit into it like it was the first good thing she'd had in weeks. Something changed in me that day. Or maybe something awakened. Something that had been waiting for the right moment to speak. When Jess left for the shelter that night, I didn't just feel relief that she had a bed. I felt purpose. Real. Steady. Humble purpose. That night, I pulled out my notebook again. Only this time, instead of writing for myself, I wrote for someone else. I wrote, what if the place I rebuilt for myself could also be a place where others come to feel human again? I didn't sleep much. My mind raced with possibilities too many. Too fast. But one kept returning. Steady and bright. A small cafe. Not fancy. Not ambitious. Just a warm place. With coffee. Lemon bars. And a handwritten note at every table reminding people they still matter. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't even have a full bank account. But I had something more powerful. I had time. I had peace. And I had a reason. I told Curtis about it the next morning. He blinked slowly and said, "Well? About damn time." Luna. The next weeks were a blur of meetings, forms, rejections, and small wins. I partnered with the church's outreach program to use the empty storefront next to the marina. A few volunteers offered to help paint. Jess even showed up on opening day. Holding a bouquet of wildflowers, she picked herself. We called it Second Light. Because sometimes, the first light goes out, but there's always a second. If you wait for it, or better yet if you build it yourself. Second Light wasn't just a cafe. It was a place where people could sit without buying anything, where you could trade stories for cookies, where no one looked at you sideways for crying into your coffee. We hung a board on the back wall with a question that changed weekly. The first one read, "What saved you this week?" People answered with sticky notes, "My dog." Milo. The woman at the gas station who smiled at me. Tuesday morning pancakes. Hope. We didn't keep profits. Every dollar went back into free meals, support group supplies, and small care packages we gave to those who needed them most. And I felt more alive than I had in years. I was no longer just recovering from something. I was contributing to something. People began calling me Miss Luna. Sometimes Mama Luna. I laughed every time. But deep down, it filled a space in me I thought had closed for good. Then one afternoon, Sarah walked through the door. She looked nervous, like someone walking into a church for the first time in years. She held her daughter's hand, my granddaughter, and they both wore matching jean jackets. I didn't cry. I just smiled and said, "Can I get you something sweet?" Sarah blinked, and tears filled her eyes. Her daughter looked at me and whispered, "You're the lady from the fridge drawing." We sat at the corner table for hours, talking, pausing, crying a little, laughing more than I expected. I didn't ask why she stayed away so long, and she didn't pretend the time hadn't passed. We started from here. This moment, not to erase the past, but to honor it. By doing better now. Before they left, Sarah handed me a small envelope. Inside was a business card. Her new counseling office, specializing in generational healing. I wanted to be part of the light too, she said. That night, I stood in the middle of the cafe. Lights dimmed. A broom in my hand, I looked at the wall of sticky notes. The cracked mugs. The napkin art left by kids. And I realized this wasn't a second chance. It was a second life. I had once believed the best parts of me were behind me. But they weren't. They were waiting in the pieces I hadn't picked up yet. And every time I offered a piece of light to someone else, I found another piece of myself. So I kept going. Not for applause. Not for redemption. But because healing multiplies when it's shared, and because no one is ever too old, too broken, or too forgotten to become a lighthouse. Especially not someone named Luna. Some people think healing is loud, that it comes in big gestures. Final speeches. A dramatic turning point with a soundtrack swelling in the background. But I learned something else. Healing, real healing, is quiet. It's washing mugs with chipped handles. It's refilling the sugar jar without being asked. It's remembering someone's name 3 weeks after they only whispered it once. It's staying. Every morning. I unlocked the door of Second Light at 6:45 a.m. 15 minutes before opening. Not because I had to, but because I like standing there in the hush, when the tables still wore their sleep, and the sun had just started to yawn across the harbor. Sometimes, I thought back to that motel room. The sound of silence there was heavy, like it wanted to suffocate me, but the silence at Second Light, it breathed with me. It reminded me I had made it. And then, something happened I hadn't planned for. A letter arrived. Not an email. A real letter. With stamps and a return address. From someone named Maria Fletcher, a high school teacher in Ohio. She'd seen a photo of our cafe on Instagram. Someone had snapped a picture of the community wall with all the sticky notes and tagged it where healing lives. Maria said she'd printed the photo and taped it to her classroom whiteboard. Every Friday, she let her students answer the question of the week. She wrote, "I teach juniors who've been through more than I can imagine. But this photo gives them a reason to speak. Thank you for creating a space that's reaching people you don't even know." I sat with that letter for a long time, because somewhere along the way, I stopped realizing just how far the light could travel. A few weeks later, a woman named Trish stopped by with her son, Caleb. She told me they'd driven 6 hours from Boise just to see the cafe in person. Caleb had been through a rough year: grief, isolation, trouble at school, and she'd read him some of the quotes from our wall each night before bed. "He didn't believe people like you existed," she said. "Now he does." Caleb asked if he could add a note to the wall. He wrote, "In uneven middle school handwriting, I'm still here. That's enough for today." I read it and had to step away to the kitchen. Not because I was sad, but because I was so proud of a boy I'd just met. The light was spreading. Not in headlines or viral posts, but in kitchens. In classrooms. In bedrooms, where someone read a quote and chose to stay one more day. And then came the moment I will never forget. One chilly afternoon in March, a reporter from a local podcast asked to interview me. I said yes. Mostly because she reminded me of my daughter when she was younger. Curious, impatient, and deeply kind. At the end of the interview, she asked, "Luna, if you could go back and talk to the version of yourself in that motel room, what would you say I didn't answer right away?" I thought of the scar on my wrist, the lemon bars, Curtis's diner, Jess, Sarah, my granddaughter's drawing, the broken mugs, the sticky notes, the note that said I'm still here. And then I looked straight at her and said, I'd tell her that silence isn't the end. It's the space before the music starts again. And I'd tell her, you're not done. The podcast aired a week later. We didn't expect it to catch on, but it did. Listens turned to messages. Messages turned to visits. People wrote in from North Dakota, from Maine, from tiny towns I'd never heard of. They all wanted to tell someone their story. So we created a new wall. This one didn't ask questions. It just held stories. Typed. Handwritten. Painted. Scribbled stories of small victories. Big losses. Brave starts. Key it returns. We called it the Wall of Still. Because even when you're broken, even when you're tired, even when you don't know the next step, you're still here. You're still worthy. You still matter. One day, a man named Eli came in. He was in his 70s, wore a navy peacoat, and carried a brown leather journal under his arm. He told me he hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone in 3 years. He came because he heard about our wall. He sat for hours. Then finally, he stood, walked to the wall, and pinned a page from his journal. He didn't say goodbye. He just nodded once. Slow and grateful. Later, when I read his note, it said, "Your cafe made me believe I could be a person again." That night, after we closed, I sat by the front window, looking at the lights along the dock. I thought about how none of this had been part of a grand plan. I never set out to be a healer. I just wanted to survive. But survival opened a door, and behind that door was something deeper: service. Stillness. Strength that doesn't shout. So many of us walk around believing our pain disqualifies us from helping others. But I've found the opposite is true. It's the people who've been through fire that know how to guide others through the smoke. And maybe that's the lesson, that the worst moments of our lives don't destroy us, they refine us. And what's left behind isn't weaker. It's pure. It's solid. It's light. So if you're reading this or hearing this, and you feel like your story ended a long time ago, I'm here to tell you, there's another chapter. There's another breath. There's another morning. And just maybe, there's another person waiting to hear your story so they know how to keep writing their own. Keep going. You never know who you're saving. Especially when the person you're saving is yourself